10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 396. Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 396 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This week, we are going to continue our series on Have You Met Miss Jones? We talked about the melody, so you know that, at least you should. And we talked about playing in these big, broad sort of key center solos. And one thing that we realized is that despite there being kind of a lot on the page, in the A sections of Have You Met Miss Jones in terms of chord symbols, it is actually entirely possible and maybe even sometimes advisable to just play in the home key and really experiment with that. And that's what we did last week. So if you're just coming to us this week, maybe you're new to the show or you just happened upon this particular series, make sure you go back to episode 394 where we start talking about this, learn the melody, and do the activities from last week. Now, today, as I mentioned, we're going to turn this into a much longer series because I think in order to be thorough and to really get the most out of this, we need more than just 4 episodes for it. So we're going to continue talking about the A sections, but this time we're going to add something that's going to add a lot of depth to your solos without being too complicated. It's actually really, really simple. So let's dive right into that. So if you pull out your PDF from this week, what you're going to notice is that we have 2 different versions of the A section with 2 different options of what to play over a particular measure. So on last episode, we talked about in the second measure, the chords actually do somewhat move outside of the key. Now, we also talked about the fact that if you don't want to, it's not the end of the world to not reflect that chord. But I think one thing that we're all sort of looking for in our playing is the ability to outline a chord if we want to, right? That's kind of like the more bebop school of playing is to like actually reflect the chords as they happen. And I think that that second bar is a great place to, once you have a handle on improvising in just the key center, is a really fantastic place to actually start reflecting that chord. Now, the confusing part is that a lot of people do different things over that second bar. So let's just dive in and start talking about what's going on in that second bar, some of our options, and then how we can play something super simple over that second bar to achieve the sound of what's going on there. Okay, so the way I learned Have You Met Miss Jones, and this isn't right or wrong, it's just the way that I learned it way back in the day, was that in the first bar, we have an F major 7 chord. This is concert. And then I learned that in the second bar, we have an F sharp diminished 7th chord. And then in the third bar, we move up to that 2 chord. And this makes a ton of sense because the way that I learned it was that the F sharp diminished 7th chord was a passing chord to get up to that G minor 7 chord. And it sounds great that way. The other way that people will play it, and since I learned this, I've encountered a lot of people who actually play this way, is they'll take the second bar and instead of playing that F sharp diminished 7th chord, they'll play a 6th chord. And you have to realize that's shorthand for jazz musicians. We play a 6th chord, meaning the dominant 6, which is really the 5 of 2, right? Just to be like theoretically correct in case any of my jazz theory teachers from college or grad school are listening. It's really a 5 of 2. And this comes to the crux of the issue is that we actually have some notes that are contained outside of the key of concert F Anyway, I'm babbling. So the second option, if we don't want to use that F sharp diminished seventh chord, is to go down to the dominant sixth chord, which would sound like this. F major 7 to D7, usually with a flat 9. And then that leads us really nicely to the 2. Let's hear that again. I think both of those things are fine options, and we're going to investigate how those two chords, F sharp diminished 7 and D7 flat 9, are related, and how we can basically play the same thing over them. Okay, so let's start with the first option that will work over both of those chords, regardless of what the rhythm section is playing. And this is by far the simplest option and the one that I think everybody should start with. This is the idea where if you want to play something in bar 2 that really traces that movement, either from F to F sharp to G or from F to D to G. This is the option that you should all use to initially start working on this. So it's very basic. If we think about the chord progression as the first option, which is F major 7 to F sharp diminished 7 to G minor 7, our first option is to literally just play the 4 notes that are in an F sharp diminished 7th arpeggio, right? So 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. And that is going to sound fantastic over, obviously, an F sharp diminished 7th chord. So and this is really nice because it's only 4 notes. And think about this for a second. The arpeggio for an F major 7th chord is FAC natural. So in order to get to that F sharp diminished 7th chord, all we do is we raise the root, we keep the A, we keep the C, and then we lower the 7th. So basically, we take those 2 outer notes, we raise one, and we lower the other, okay? And this will sound fantastic, and the other thing is that it's only 4 notes. But check out how cool this would be if the rhythm section were to go down to that D chord, that D7 flat 9. Well, we could actually play exactly the same thing. And instead of it being 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7 over F sharp, if the D is in the bass, we get 3, 5, 7, flat 9. Which sounds just as good, right? So if I play it over the first option, sounds great because I'm just outlining that F sharp diminished 7th chord. But if I play it over the second option where the rhythm section is playing a D in the bass, it sounds just as good. 2, 3, 4. Might even sound better, right? So that's great. We just learned one thing, which is an F sharp diminished 7th arpeggio, and we can use it regardless of what the rhythm section is doing there. Okay, so our second option is a little bit more advanced simply because it uses more notes. And here is my big suggestion for all of you. Until you can play some cool stuff, some cool phrases, just using the 4 notes of the arpeggio, don't even worry about this. But if you're somebody that has done some stuff over this, then okay, now you can go on, you could start using this. So all we're going to do is we're going to think about now, instead of a diminished arpeggio starting on F sharp, we're going to think about a diminished scale starting on concert F sharp. And we're going to start creating some material with that. Right? Now, the coolest part about that is, again, it works exactly the same and sounds just as good over a rhythm section playing an F sharp in the bass and playing that diminished chord, or playing a D in the bass, right? So if we have enough sharp in the bass, obviously it's going to sound great. And it's going to work really, really well over a D in the bass as well. Okay. So if you start to feel like you have some really good ability to use just the 4-note arpeggio, which again is the thing that I think all of you should start with, then you could start exploring the scale and what's going on with that. Now, the rest of the A section this week, you're still just going to play an F. All right. We'll talk about some other strategies that we can use later, but just stick to F. But now, if you want some of that sound in bar 2 that actually reflects what the rhythm section is doing, then you can use these 2 strategies. Get them written out on the PDF. I've got the arpeggio and the scale, so it's all right there for you. And then all you have to do is experiment with it and try to figure out how to contain it to that second bar. And that's the best way you're going to learn how to do this, is to take the basic information, which I just presented to you, and experiment with it. There's no substitute for that experimentation. So that's what we're going to do this week. I'm going to have trading tracks again for all the Patreon members. And you're going to be able to put that on and play over and over and over again. Also have a backing track of just the A section, so you can repeat it, 1,000 times if you want to. And maybe I actually suggest that because you really have to get used to this stuff, especially if you want to move on to more advanced sounds after this. Now, I just mentioned Patreon. If you're new to this show, or if you're not a supporter yet, but this episode really piques your interest, Patreon is where people can go to get PDFs and audio examples and trading tracks and all that stuff for every single episode. And it's the way that we keep the show in business. We don't do any advertisements on the show, so it's supported 100% by listeners like you. So if you want to support the show, get the materials that I just mentioned that are really great for practicing, simply go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go over to patreon.com and just search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Get yourself signed up over there and you get instant access to every single episode that we've ever done. And there's quite a bit over there in terms of jazz education materials, and it's a very reasonable price as well. Thank you to our new patrons this week. Thank you to Ryan, Rob, Glenn, Jim, and Mark. Thank you so much for signing up to become part of the family and supporting the show. We couldn't do it without you. Of course, to everybody else over there that's been supporting us for months and years, thank you. Really, really appreciate that. And you keep the show coming out in high quality each and every week. So again, that's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners, or patreon.com, search up the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. All right, everybody. I'm excited about diving further into this tune in the coming episodes. This is one of my favorites, and it's just a really interesting tune that can teach us a lot incrementally, which I'm always a huge fan of when it comes to teaching. So hope you're doing well, staying safe and healthy. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week. Bye.